Dr. Shimon Lev with a packet of books of the Sahitya Akademi and also traditional gamosha. Dr. Shimon Lev, eminent artist, curator and researcher in Indian studies, distinguished writers, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to welcome all of you for this special program with Dr. Shimon Lev that Sahitya Akademi is organizing in collaboration with Embassy of Israel in India. Friends, the cultural and trade relations between India and Israel date back to almost 1000 BCE. One can trace the reference to Indian merchants in Baveru in a Buddhist tale, references to Tarshish ships during King Solomon's reign, and many other texts of both the countries. There have been a number of studies on the similarities of and relationship between Hinduism and Judaism. It is a recorded fact that people of all communities in India have accepted and embraced Jews who migrated to the subcontinent. Till date, these followers of Judaism coexist in peace and mutual cooperation with other communities in Indian subcontinent. Both these countries have ancient and rich literary heritage. Both India and Israel had a variety of literary traditions and have had more than a brush of touch with mystical traditions and lineages. Again, both Israel and India are trying to revive ancient and dying languages. There is a concerted effort to revive Yiddish language and literature in Israel, while in India there is a movement to revive Sanskrit language and literature. The effort, born out of reflection and understanding that a loss of any language is not merely a loss of tool for communication, but a loss of entire culture and language, and literature represents is bound to yield fruits sooner than later. Insofar as the physical aspects of cultural relations are concerned, waves of a time and tidal changes of history have ensured that both these great countries remain separate. But the ancient relationship and the exchanges have ensured that they remained close to each other despite the interference of political atmosphere. Just a couple of years ago, India and Israel both have celebrated the 25th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Israel. As part of the commemoration of the 25th anniversary, the Sahitya Akademi sent a delegation of Indian writers to Israel in November 2017, and Akademi received a delegation from Israel in February 2018. We are thankful to the Embassy of India in Israel and also the Embassy of Israel in India for making this possible. And after a gap of 2 years now, the Embassy of Israel is kind enough to give us an opportunity to host Dr. Shimon Lev, who is an eminent artist, curator and researcher in Indian studies, and he has widely published, curated and exhibited in numerous solo and group exhibitions, and he has various publications to his credit, including the Story of Mahatma Gandhi and Hermann Kellenbach, besides several published research papers, and he was the academic editor of the Hebrew edition of Gandhi Satyagraha in South Africa and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Hindu Swaraj, and the cultural and political encounter between Indian and Jews in the context of their respective national movement. And is working as the chief curator on an exhibition about the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and is also curated around 30 exhibitions worldwide and participated in more than 50 others. And today is going to speak on a topic, very interesting topic, and many people have asked us and also sent a mail whether it is a spelling mistake, because his topic is wiring about India in Israel. Many people think so instead of wiring, it should have been a writing. But when we cross-checked with him, but he clarified that, of course, it is only wiring about India and culture and what is that today is going to speak amongst us. And with these few words, I once again welcome Dr. Shimon Lev, and also I thank the Embassy of Israel in India. Particularly, we have with us today Ms. Worley Goldsmith, who is a head of public diplomacy in Embassy of Israel, and she will also say a few words before I invite Dr. Shimon Lev. Dr. Ms. Worley Goldsmith, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I'll be very quick. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but today is actually the anniversary of the 28 years of diplomatic relations between Israel and India. So I think it's beautiful that as a celebration we're here today and we can hear Dr. Shimon Lev speaking about India in Israel. And I hope for many more interactions between Israeli and Indian culture, if it's a translation of books or something else, and I'll let you speak because that's why we're all here for.
I think it's You hear me?
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel very much privileged to be here, and especially after both of you were talking, because I think in a way, in my personal biography, I follow this gradual change from coming here first time in '84, being, I had a Canadian passport also, so I had no problem to get visa to India, meeting 10 Israelis in 8 months traveling in India, and then what's going on now. Like if you would tell me 30 years ago that I would be sitting here speaking in Sahitya Akademi talking about my works in India, I would look about you, this won't happen. I mean, so this changing in the relationship, and as you say, like 28 years of diplomatic, for me it's like something like I follow on my personal visiting to India. I've been here 60, 70 times, sometimes even with my 3 kids. We stayed for half a year in South India and then also in Dharamsala. So I was involved in many trips and work and research. So as I said, this kind of thing, it's really something really I feel in my personal biography. It's part of it. I see this change. So, and this is also reflected in my work. The title of the lecture is Writing about India and Israel. But actually the title should be, or what I mean underneath it, is it possible to write about India and Israel? Is it possible to write at all for foreigners about India or somebody else? It's not, of course it's possible, a lot of people do it, but actually there are some problematic aspects of that. And this is something we have to deal with that when you have to write about India. There are various reasons for that. India is very big, very diverse. We have the challenge of Orientalism. As you all know, it's something that I will come to this point again later, but it's something that it's very, 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 very difficult to get rid of it, to look on, in India as not in outside Orientalistic eyes. This is a big, big challenge. And what I'm trying to speak, or what I will try to say, it's actually to look how I deal with this through my works, this kind of approach. But this is the question. I mean, how should we write about India from outside? I've been here, again, 70, 80 times. I wrote thousands of articles, many more, some books and things like that, but still, India, it's a riddle for us. So it's like, it's natural. Israel is small, India is huge. Just you spoke about translating books to 24 different languages in India. You know, it's something that it's completely unproportionate, and there's also other layers. The other point, which I think you also, in a way, reflect about it. Actually, is there a special connection between Israeli people, Jewish people, or India? So the obvious thing is to say, of course, there are two ancient civilization, maybe the two ancients that still exist, that you have a continuity with changes. I mean, the only two, let's say, cultures that people can read text that were written in their language 3,000 years ago, maybe also the Greeks, I don't know, but there is still continuity. It's the Indian culture and the Jewish culture, the Hebrew culture. We can read the text, and this is very much in context of the revival of the languages. So when I came, you know, many people ask me in India, I give from time to time lectures, how did you come to India? How did you develop your interest in India? So I always say, I have a very simple, shallow reason, but very justified one. I mean, you know, in Israel, you have to go to the army for 3 years. Men goes for 3 years, and women go for 2 years for compulsory service. And, so when you start to study, you are already 22, 23. So usually after the army service, and I'm sure you are all aware of the hundreds of Israelis that were strolling around in the main bazaar in Paraganj, trying to escape Delhi as fast as possible to other places. So it's very common to travel, to make a break after the army service and to go to travel. So, you know, I had an elder brother. He was one of the first traveler to South America. So, of course, nobody wants to follow his brother. So I decided, okay, so I go to the Far East. I was very much a physical, you know, like sporty, physical, to kind of adventure. And in fact, I owe India the fact that I started the fact that I started to write. So, I came to India, as I said, traveling here for 8 months, and in the Far East, I didn't meet almost any Israelis. When I came back to Israel, I studied photography, and then I was invited to guide a group here in India. But my first visit that I really photographed here was the Kumbh Mela in 89, 90 in Allahabad. And when I came back to Israel, there was a geographical magazine. I showed them the amazing photos. This is a very unique event, which at that time nobody in Israel knew what is the Kumbh Mela. Today, if you will go to the Indian embassy before the Kumbh Mela, there are special tours of photographers, and at that time nobody knew about it. I brought them the photo, and they said, yeah, but somebody has to write about it. So I said, I don't know, find someone, you know. So I said, no, who can write about it? Who can write about it? So you should write about it. So this was my first article about India. This was a very popular geographical magazine. And then it followed by another and another, and most of them were kind of these cultural traveler articles. I'm emphasizing this point because I call it today the secondary India, like the secondary imaginary Indian for the Israeli traveler. This is not India, like what the traveler experience here. I mean, I cannot say it's not India, but if you look on it more closely, the travelers or the backpackers, they're going in a kind of specific layers. You know, they have the same geographical points that they're going. We call it, hummus. You know, the Israeli Arabic food, the hummus. So we call it the hummus trail. You know, because you have Israeli salad, hummus, like in certain places, Pushkar, Meklot Ganj near Dharam Sala, and so on. Like you can go to a certain point, and the whole thing is really being adapted to do the travelers, not only Israelis, all travelers. You get the amount of spirituality you need, you get the workshop that you need, you get the guest, you get the Wi-Fi. You can get, so it's kind of a certain, going in a certain layer, you're not going down, you're not going up, it's a very kind of specific, I don't criticize it, but to say this is completely different, let's say, experience that what would you say it's India? I mean, it's part of it, it's kind of a specific layer which is very much built into it. And this really, when I started to travel, it really bothered me a lot. And then, you know, I was writing a lot of articles. I was in the 90s, I was very well known about knowing India very well. I bought here an Enfield motorcycle on traveling, like the first one, and then people started following, like many kind of things. And then I decided to go to the academic. And when I was, at least practically, I knew India much better than my teachers. I mean, they knew India, they knew Sanskrit, they knew things like that. But in terms of traveling in India, knowing India, of course, I knew India much more than them. And you know, they knew my name. I mean, I was a bit not a young student. I was a bit older. And I remember, do you know Professor Schulman, David Schulman, like the famous Israeli, the father of Indian studies in Israel. Now he published a book about the Tamil language, which was
Telugu.
No, to do something about now. It was a lot of criticism about it. There was a big debate about it. So he's really the father of Indian studies in Israel, and it's not so easy. I mean, you're saying that you're publishing all the classical Indian studies, but I think we pay a price, not because of Professor Schulman, but we pay a price for this focusing on Sanskrit, and I will come to this point later. This is for me, it's a very serious matter, because you cannot take any course in the Israeli academia about economic in India, or about the political thing. Still the image is the Sanskrit. Sanskrit is it's like you will want to study about Israel and you say, okay, we study classical Hebrew. You know, there is a difference. There is a big danger in that. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's very much, as I hinted before, it's very much connected to Orientalism, what we call the Aryan myth. You know, in a way, I mean, is this India? Is there other? What about contemporary literature? Thing like that. But, you know, after 1 or 2 years in university, I had a discussion with him. And, you know, I told him, look, I showed him one of the articles I wrote before. And I told him, look, I read what I read now, what I wrote then, and it's such a nonsense. You know, I mean, such a Orientalist approach, such a problematic. So he told me, after that he denied that, but I swear that it's true. And he told me, you know, if you write about India, you write also nonsense. You have to take it in account. When somebody writes about India from outside, he writes also nonsenses. And I think it's very, very true. And this is the challenge that all the time we writers have to take in account. It's almost impossible and not to write also nonsenses about India, because, you know, as I said, it's very big, it's very diverse. The question of languages, it's sometimes completely different concepts. It doesn't mean that outside writers don't. It's also necessary to have a sometimes outside look. It's also helpful. I mean, of course, there is the other side for this coin, but when you think about it, it's even more. When I did my PhD, so I always said half jokingly, and again I say there is some kind of truth in it. I said that what you really learn, what you really study when you're doing PhD, and you know, I did my first degree in Indian studies, my second degree, and then my PhD in comparative religion, which focusing on Christianity and Judaism, but I was the one that dealing with Indian studies. And I said, when you do your PhD, one thing you realize that a lot, and I'm not trying to I mean, it's not personal. It's not anyone personally all over the world, but even very intellectual, clever people write nonsenses. This is something you have to take into account. I don't know if you agree or not, but always. And when do they write this nonsense? Mostly when they write on current affairs, political analyses. When you look back in perspective, you see that they are captured by the misleading, wrong conception of their time, and this is why sometimes this is one of the advantages of writing history, that you can have a broader approach, looking at in a more broader way, in a more better perspective way, things like that, and just name them. I mean, I don't want to name, but anyone you can say. He writes also nonsense. So this going together, writing in India and right. So this is something I always keep in my mind. It's not I'm the same. I'm also writing nonsenses, of course. But this challenge of writing about India, this is something I really keep in mind. That the only thing I can say, the only thing I know about India, if I say it in a very simple way, that I don't know. That's kind of red line that you have to be careful of that. When I did my master degree, I was doing what is called the Israeli Trail. There is a trail that going across the whole Israel. And I was walking, I did it for this magazine, every second weekend. I was divorced at that time, so one weekend with the kids, one weekend with this Israeli Trail. When I cross about, there is the terms kibbutz, like the cooperative Israeli pioneer settlements. There is a kibbutz Ganya, which is the first kibbutz, was built in 1910, exactly the same year that Tolstoy Farm in South Africa was created by Kallenbach and Gandhi. And there is the grave of the most important ideologist of the Zionist movement, A.D. Gordon, which advocate the moral aspect of working with the hand, agriculture as kind of national revival. Very, very similar in a way to Gandhi. He was also influenced by Tolstoy in a certain way. He was called the Jewish Tolstoyan. And suddenly near his grave, I see the grave of Hermann Kallenbach, which I knew only few things about him. I knew that he was a friend of Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa, something like this. That's it. And somehow I pushed into the article that I wrote about this part, that few sentences about Hermann Kallenbach. And to my surprise, 2 weeks after that, I got invitation to visit his archive, which was located in a small apartment in Haifa. And I came there. This is still, the daughter of the niece, the grandniece of Hermann Kallenbach, Isa Sarid, invited me, and I came to this small room, and on the shelf there were thousands, or I don't know, maybe 100 files with the name Gandhi. In the small apartment, teeny apartment in the Haifa in Israel. This for me was a kind of a shocking thing. And I was just in the beginning of my master degree, but I knew that this is going to be a book. Even that I didn't even consider myself as a historian at that time, but I already published some other books and other publications. And then I started to research, and then the question why it was not explored. I mean, people wrote in India, some Gandhi scholars knew the name Hermann Kallenbach. It's not that they didn't know, but nobody really researched this archive. And this is kind of a chapter in Gandhi biography which was missing. I mean, nobody wrote about it. So one of the reasons, because there were no diplomatic relationship between India and Israel, so all this course, all this encounter was more difficult. I mean, and so it was something on the side. And then I started to do my research. Immediately I changed it to my thesis. And this just opened a whole new world, I mean, of this Gandhi Jewish supporters in South Africa, which I will say a few words about this. But in general, when I continued to work, I saw that actually there is another layer of the political encounter. Because Hermann Kallenbach, after he separated from Gandhi, Gandhi went to India, Kallenbach returned to South Africa. He was asked by Moshe Sharet, the second prime minister of Israel, on the 30s, to go to India to meet Gandhi and to try to change his objection or to modify his objection for the Zionist movement. You could say broadly, in a broad way, that Gandhi, at least in the beginning, Gandhi gave the ideological opposition or opposing ideologically the Zionism, and Nehru gave the political side of it. And then I saw that the certain names are coming all the time, going through all these years. So when he came back, Kallenbach went to India in 1937, met Gandhi again, and was trying to do what I call the Zionist effort in India in the mid-70s. So this story of this earlier relationship between Gandhi and Kallenbach had a second part, which is more important to Israeli than to India, but trying to change India attitude to Israel. This is bringing us back to the first point that, you know, we're celebrating now 20 years, but actually we know what all we missed during these 40 years of non-diplomatic relationship. This is a big failure, but, you know, we cannot cry the milk, but this is a fact, especially when you see the relationship of that. The question of the Jewish supporters of Gandhi in South Africa, it's very interesting because, I don't know if you're aware of that, but the 5 closest European supporters of Gandhi were all Jews. Hermann Kallenbach, Henry Pollack, his secretary Sonia Slezhin, Louis Rich, which was the founder of the Theosophical Society, very important, nobody wrote about him, now I'm writing about him. Gabriel Isaac. Somebody heard the name Gabriel Isaac? But Gabriel Isaac, for example, he's the, as I see it at least, he's the only non-Indian who sacrificed his life for the Indian struggle in South Africa. He was arrested, he came out of jail mentally and physically broken. Few months later he died. So directly or indirectly, he is the one that sacrificed his life for the Indian struggle. Strangely enough, Gandhi didn't mention him in the autobiography, and Pollack wrote to Gandhi complaining, why you don't give credit to Isaac Gabriel? You forgot, you know, you don't give him credit. Gandhi, in an apologetic way, said, yeah, I have to check in the English index. He was in jail. I don't know, something like this, but he would not be deleted from history. But obviously, Gandhi proved wrong in this aspect. Next week, they're going to be publishing kind of a journalistic article about this very unique story. But what were the reason for all these Jews to support Gandhi? The reason that there were Jews, the reason that the Jews, we know what is to be discriminated, we know what is to be Asian. I mean, we are considered to be Asian. This is like, for you it might be strange, but for the Jewish, especially in Europe, the Jewish population in Europe, they were considered to be Asian or half Asian. What is the meaning of Aryan and Semites? Like all this Orientalist look in the 19th century, looking back, like when Europe identifies itself as Aryans. So it's not just looking for our roots of the Sanskrit, you know, the Aryans, some went to North Europe and some went to India. That's what like the Orientalists put. Like what was this craze of translating the Bhagavad Gita, the Shakuntala, all these classical Indian amazing works, like the race for translating the Veda. You know, all this, it was a clear definition, or there was a big effort to distance themselves to what they owe to Judaism. I mean, one extreme aspect of that is, of course, it's the Holocaust, which we are tonight, I think we are memorizing tomorrow. Because like Hitler, there's the one that used Aryans. So the definition of Europe itself as an Aryan, it's like superior Aryan against the inferior Semites. What was the reaction of Jewish intellectuals like Martin Buber, philosopher, and so on? They had to react to that. And one of the reaction, it was actually, it's one of the main motivation of the establishment of the Zionist movement. Because if we are not accepted, you know, if there is a racial discourse, if you say, it doesn't matter if you will change your cultural behavior. We will try to assimilate, we will be nice, that won't help because you have a different race. This is also the danger of racial discourse. But so if we are considered to be Semites, so where we are from Israel, the land of Israel. So this is the major part. So India, people don't think about it, also in Israel, but actually India, or at least the Aryan aspect of that, plays a very important role in the recognition that, you know, we will never be accepted. So we have to, the solution for that is to establishing our own state. This is a very, very important point. And then from all countries, who was the country that most symbolized the revival of the East? You have two possibilities. One is Japan, and one is India. India for much more extent than Japan, because Japan first it was less known, but India, the one that fighting the British colonialism, the Asian country, to ancient civilization, hundreds of years under foreign rule, suddenly is awakening. So one of the most important way to look at that, it was to look on India. And the two most important representatives, you can say rightly or wrongly, but the two who were the two main representatives of India to the world, one Tagore and Gandhi, and later on Gandhi. And even you can see kind of a shift between them. First Tagore, more universalistic, more idealistic, kind of loving nature, romantic in a way you might say, and then Gandhi, which was of course much more difficult to deal. Who is Gandhi? He's a riddle. You know, he's a politician, he's a saint. It's, you know, who is this? This is something. But for example, this is this book which was published 2 years ago here in Delhi. It's called From Lithuania to Shanti Nikatan, Shlomit Plaum and Rabindra Tagore. So it's her. She was a woman kindergarten teacher that she met Tagore in New York. She came to, and she was, you know, she heard Tagore, and she didn't hear a poet. She heard a prophet. This is how she writes. You know, for her it was this linkage to what are the lands of the prophets and the saints, who are India, and of course the land of the prophet, Israel, you know, from the Bible. So all this identification or self-definition of Asian was very much through, for example, the eyes of Tagore. And she came to Shantinikatan, she stayed for a year and a half. She has a beautiful account of Tagore. We translated it to English, because it was written in Hebrew in the 30s, in a very strange Hebrew. They didn't have enough words. She didn't have enough words sometimes, because when she was dealing with theater, because of the revival of the language. So she has a very beautiful account of Tagore with paintings and so on. But it's not only her story. She became the unofficial ambassador of India in Israel. She was the only one who met Gandhi, stayed with Tagore, knew India, lived in India. But living in India was more than just traveling like today. It was like kind of discovering her Asian identity. It's a very symbolizing a whole process of that. The question of Israel, what is it? Israel is a Western country, is an Asian country, because a lot of the Israeli or the Zionist leaders were kind of demagogic. They said, oh, we are Asian, but we want to bring Western values. But this discourse to where Israel belongs, which is still a discourse that's going on in Israel, who we are actually, you can see there was a big trend of, let's say, let's abandon our Western values and adopt the real Asian values, whatever it means. When I'm speaking about the people who wrote nonsenses, 100 years ago, everyone wrote the man of the East and the man of the West. I mean, today you cannot write it. But at that time, it's like Rudyard Kipling, or Western East, the twain should never be met. Today you cannot write it, of course. But at that time, everyone wrote like this: the East and the West. Some kind of I don't know what it means. So, as I said, and then I realized that actually there is need to be kind of researcher looking in a more broader way about this connection between India and Israel, the Jewish world. And this book that was published also 1 year and a half ago. It was published in Hebrew. It's called, the English title, as you said, as Dr. Rao said, it's Clear the Path of India. Clear the Path of India, it's a quote, which is actually playing with words from the Talmud. There is also clear of somebody saying, I know the stars in heaven more in the Talmud, like the classical Hebrew, let's say, code of conduct book. It's a 36 volume, very, like if you see the Jewish people studying in yeshiva, which is the religious study, so they study the Talmud. It's kind of a basic, very, as I said, 36 volume with hundreds of commentaries and so on. So Clear the Path of India, what actually, he wrote it in 36. What he's saying, we know India, we look on India more than we look about United States and Europe, because India should interest us more. And strangely enough, the population of Israel or Palestine at that time, there were 200,000 people. The Jewish were still minority in Israel. But so many books were translated, and so many books were written about India. So, in a way, you can say that people at that time in Palestine, what we call the Jewish Yishuv, the Jewish population of Palestine, not the Arabic population of Palestine, they knew more about India than, in a way, the travelers are knows today. Because, as I said, today the travelers are traveling in kind of a specific layer. And this led me to a much broader research, which, again, as I said, thank you. As I said, underneath, I'm not writing it, but underneath, it's the question of, is there a special connection? Even if those Israeli travelers, why do they attract to India? Is there something that's still underneath? It's more than, even if they don't know it, but it's something kind of a feeling that there is a unique closeness between India and Israel and India. My answer is yes. I think yes. Even if it's sometimes superficial, sometimes based on Orientalist paradigm, but the answer is yes. I think, and I will say a few words about it. I don't know how much time do I have. So I will just say a few words. So there's a whole, this opened a whole possibilities of comparison. And if, just for example, and now I'm editing academic editing Ambedkar book, The Annihilation of Caste. It's going to be translated to Hebrew. So, for example, there is a very interesting discourse. Like I title it some bit kind of ironically, who is in a worse condition? The Dalit or the Jews? Like during the, for example. Yeah, and there is a whole discourse about this. Because Max Weber, the famous sociologist, he said, to explain the Jewish situation in Europe, he said, the Jews are the pariah of Christianity. That's what he said. He took it as a clear fact. I think he's completely wrong. I think he's completely wrong. There is the question, I think you mentioned, there is the question of the refugee, India and the Holocaust, which is it's very important aspect. For me, this I say personally, it's always very difficult to see that here in every street corner, people selling Mein Kampf. I think people in India, sometimes there is a lack of knowledge. I mean, I speak in general, I don't speak about anyone here, but there is a lack of knowledge about the Holocaust in India. I mean, all my family was killed. You know, my grandparents, the little sister of my father, the whole extended family. It's something that people don't understand when they speak about Hitler. And even if they speak about Hitler positively, they should read Mein Kampf, because you can see how he treated the Indians. I mean, the Indians would be the next or the third or fourth round if Hitler would be. He didn't consider the Indians as Aryans. I mean, that you can be sure. There is the whole question of ideology. I mean, working with the land, which was a very fundamental aspect in the Zionist movement, like changing our unhealthy life in the diaspora, coming back to history or coming back to Israel and working as normal people working the land. This is very similar to kind of at least what Gandhi tried to do, in at least some aspect of that. There is the question of Tagore and his enormous influence on the Hebrew literature. And Tagore maybe even more than anyone else symbolized this, the revival of the East. I don't know if you know, but Tagore won the Nobel Prize in November 13. Already in 14, David Frischman, a very important early critic and who was trying to bring to the Jewish literature classical work from all over the world, started to translate Tagore. So, and he translated. So you can imagine he was translated to German, English. I mean, English he wrote, but and to him, you know, and Tagore, you know, even they were, you know, Rabindra Tagore. So sometimes, you know, they're calling Rabbi, like Rabbi, you know, Rabbi Tagore, because you know with his look but he was. His impact was enormous on the Jewish literature. There were hundreds of articles about him, a lot of translations still going on, and even there is a street in Israel because a meeting with Einstein, like where Nobel Prize in the North Tel Aviv. So what I'm trying to say is that, maybe to conclude, because I see that, of course, I have several other points that I want to say, but that the closeness, I mean, again, it might be based on it. Of course, there is a layer of Orientalism, you know, where still India is, you know, India is like this, you know, India, there is tolerance, there is everybody can believe in it, you know, things like that, all this kind of thing. But the fact that there is a lot of attraction to India and Israel is based on a kind of a very deep notion of two ancient civilizations which share a lot in common, and you know, again, I said, like, language is classical text, being Asian, things like that. So it's something very deep, and it's not only superficial, not only Orientalist approach. And I think this attraction is something that it's true. The proof of that, or kind of a proof of that when you look back on Jewish classical literature from the beginning, or like let's say from the medieval ages, always the attitude to India was ambiguity. You know, in one hand, you know, okay, there are weird practices in India, there is idol worship, like the monotheistic religion, but there is wisdom there is wisdom in India, there is philosophy. You can see Rabbi Yehuda Levi, like the classical philosophical work, try to prove why Judaism is the best. So all the time the counter-argument, wow, you say it's like this in Judaism, like the one that he's discussed with him, he said, oh, but in India it's also like this. You know, so all the time India plays a role in this comparison, because India symbolized the place where there was some kind of wisdom, Brahmin as Jews, there was even Greek comparison between Brahmins and Jews. So all this, it's a very based, it doesn't mean that it's true, but this notion is a very old and very deep and very well rooted. Thank you very much. I mean, I want to open it to some questions. I don't know if you will moderate.
If you have any questions, we can open the...
What was your experience in Kumbh Mela?
You can give answer from here. This one, yeah.
It's a very good question, because you know. But again, I'm trying to answer it in a more broader way. In this way, at least. I mean, I was traveling in the beginning as every other traveler, you know, sleeping in a specific guest house. And the Kumbh Mela was a turning point. I mean, I don't know, at that time, again, there were other tourists, but there were only few. And I stayed for 1 month with the sadhus, and like, this was something, for me, it was a different world, different planet. This was something that you really realize how little you know, and this is, I think it's a unique experience. Not easy one, of course, because, you know, so much crowd and, you know, pushing, but it was, it's really changed. When you look on it, it changed my whole attitude to India.
I just wanted to know, because you've been mentioning Tagore, you know, in having been translated into Hebrew, and there's a lot of people studying Tagore. You know, is it the study of Tagore beyond Tagore, the poet, also? The other aspects of Tagore, has it all been translated? Like, you know, when we work for the plight of women, or the racial discrimination, or the caste system. So is the awareness, must have been, because, but is it translated in Hebrew, besides the literature?
Sadhana is translated. Sadhana, his work, Sadhana.
Okay.
So it has been translated. So this, I think, it's a good example. Shlomit Plaum translated quite few articles about Tagore, but I think it was the main his poetry, which again, you know, I didn't mention it, but all the people who were a lot of essays about Tagore, so all of them emphasize one thing: the closeness to the Psalms, or to the author. Like in Tagore, it's like our own classical works, like the Psalms in the Bible, which is very concentrated. Like we say jokingly that all poetry, not jokingly, I think it's true in a way, all poetry after King David is just a commentary or shadows of these Psalms. So this was this comparison. Like he writes in the language of the Bible, the Bible. Or the ancient scroll of the Judean desert. One thing that's very interesting to know about Tagore, I'm sure many of you know him, Jarosz Korczak, like the Jewish Polish educator, which he ran an orphanage house. So when he knew that he's going to be deported to Auschwitz with the kids, with his own kids, so he chose in the orphanage house of the kids to play. The kids play the play, The Post, and this was kind of preparing them for the death. This is a very kind of chilling story. I mean, but it just emphasized that how Tagore was famous. You know, that he was kind of every intellectual Every Jewish intellectual knew about Tagore. To Gandhi, and this to come back to the point of again to the Holocaust. To Gandhi, the attitude was more problematic. In the beginning, it was kind of astonishment. Who is Gandhi? Unique. But when he published in '38 article, the Jews in a region, offering the Jews to sacrifice themselves in Satyagraha way to Hitler, he was deleted. He was deleted from the, let's say, the Jewish Zionist discourse. This was too much. I don't know, the philosopher Martin Buber wrote him a letter. It's called Two Letters to Gandhi, which unfortunately Gandhi didn't reply to them. But, and this is maybe again a chance to say something. I mean, I'm not a Gandhian in the classical way. I mean, I'm a researcher. But one of the things that I try to do, it's to, and this is publishing Satyagraha in South Africa, Hind Swaraj, which is a very successful book in Israel. It's already going to be the 4th edition now, and it was just published a few years ago. Is to try to now, I think we have time, we are grown enough, we are mature enough to stop to look only of the narrow perspective of the Holocaust and the question of the Zionist movement, and to look at Gandhi in a broader way. And I would say my small little contribution is like to bring the possibility to Israeli Hebrew readers to read Gandhi in Hebrew. I mean, I think it's a very important aspect because it's you can agree or disagree, it doesn't matter, but it's important. I think every intellectual should have it in his house, or should be a possibility to have access for that. And luckily, Satyagraha in South Africa, it's a more problematic book. It's a very difficult book. I think it's mostly for researcher. But Hind Swaraj and my experience with The Truth, of course, was translated before. They're very popular.
Just one question.
What do you think about Dr. Ambedkar's India, and what is the relation between Jews, Aryans, and Indians? Can you explain it?
Yeah, of course, this is I'm thinking if to be careful or not.
Give us the right perspective. Please give us the right perspective.
I'm reading now in Hebrew and in English again, Arundhati Roy and her introduction to Annihilation of Caste, which is a book by itself, which I think is problematic in this respect. I must admit, because it's a way. I know that she now published it as a separate because of this, I think, criticism. It's very problematic. I don't agree with her. I think there is again. I'm not a Gandhian. I'm aware of the criticism, but one thing I want to say. I mean, judging South Africa, and then I will come to the point of judging this attitude to consider Gandhi as a racist. This, for me, if I've said it in the most weirdest or most blunt way, this is completely bullshit. I mean, to say that Gandhi was a racist, he was young, he was American, he was coming from England. You have to see his development. Everybody spoke at that time in South Africa like this about the blacks as the words primitive. I think that now demolishing his statues in Africa states. This is for me. This is ridiculous. This is completely. It's again always bring us the question when you judge things in, let's say, postmodernist or contemporary values, things that were written 100 years ago. This is leading for a lot of mistakes. You have to judge Gandhi in South Africa how personally he behaved to the blacks. This is how you have to judge him.